Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our monthly Faith Enrichment Speaker Series. My name is Sister Joyce, and I'm Pastoral Associate here at Our Lady of Pompeii. This evening, I have the privilege of introducing Deacon Ted Pijacki. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Deacon Ted has been an educator since 1972. He taught at St. Joseph Collegiate, Niagara University, Christ the King Seminary, and spent 15 summers teaching driver education. We're glad you lived to tell about it and you're with us tonight. Deacon has also been married since 1972 to his wife, Carol. Together they have 4 children, 4 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. Ordained a deacon in 1994, Deacon Ted served at St. Joseph University Parish, Buffalo, St. Joachim and Anne, Attica, Varysburg, and was also pastoral administrator there. St. Benedict Parish, Eggertsville, and again back to St. Joseph University. Deacon had 7 religious studies textbooks published with a grant from John Carroll University and was awarded the National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowships to do research at Canisius College, Columbia University, and SUNY Geneseo. Deacon Ted enjoys golfing, traveling, and reading, and was a Buffalo Bills, Sabres, and Buffalo Philharmonic season ticket holder for many years. Now he and Carol are full-time babysitters for their youngest granddaughter, Eliana. Please join me in welcoming Deacon Ted Pijacki.
Very much to Joyce for that wonderful. Most of all, thanks to Joyce for inviting me here to share something very deep and personal for me, the apparitions, the visions at Fatima and at Lourdes. I appreciate your being here because I know I'm the only thing standing between you and the Buffalo Bills game. Now, hopefully when you came in, you got one of these sheets. It's an outline. I like to give those out when I'm giving a talk because, sometimes I say something and people want to go home and do a little research, maybe find out a little bit more about a particular thing, and you have the spelling here and you have the sequence. The other benefit is, if it's 7:45 and I'm on point 3, we've got a problem. So you can tell when we get through this where we are, how close we are to getting to the end. So, let us remember we are in the holy presence of God. Wherever I've taught for the last 50 years, I always begin a class or a talk with that phrase, let us remember we are in the holy presence of God. We always are, but sometimes we forget. When I was driving here and I got cut off onto 33, came really close to forgetting I was in the presence of God. I almost met God. But that's something important for us because these visions are part of that spiritual world that Jesus talks to us about. Jesus' teaching is primarily teaching us about spirituality. Now, we'd all say, okay, well, body and soul. It's a little bit more complicated and a little bit more in depth with Jesus than just a simple recognition. Jesus is very frequently saying the work of the Spirit. There's an invisible world, there's a visible world. There's a physical and a spiritual world. When Jesus begins his ministry, he goes out into the desert for 40 days, and the scriptures say very clearly, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. And he fasted for 40 days, and then they add something very significant. They say, and he was hungry. It shows that there's 2 dimensions to us, a spiritual invisible soul within us, and yet a body that has needs for food, drink, etc. The other bookend, so that's the beginning of Jesus' ministry, the 40 days in the wilderness. The end, after the Last Supper, Jesus goes for what we call the agony in the garden. And he's out there, he asks his disciples, please stay awake and pray with me. And they fall asleep. And he goes up to them and he says very, very importantly, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And if you are tuned into that, you will hear Jesus making those kinds of references throughout the Gospels on Sunday. When Jesus prays the Our Father, they say, how do we pray? What's the essence of our spiritual life? He says, thy will be done on earth, the physical existence, as it is in heaven. And on Ash Wednesday, we talk about signs of faith. That's part of the topic today. We receive those ashes, and we receive those words that are very, very spiritually motivating. Say, remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return. That our physical bodies will pass. But the important part, Jesus is saying, the spirit will live on. And that's the key to Jesus' teaching, the new life that we receive at Easter. One of the key stories that's in the Gospels that relates to these visions is the transfiguration of Jesus. First of all, you'll notice that he goes up a mountain. Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days, the desert. There's a certain distraction that we have where, as I was mentioning, when I'm driving, I might become distracted from any kind of spiritual awareness of God. And so it's in those remote, quiet settings that we become more and more attuned and alert of the spiritual world. And what happens when Jesus is there on the mountain? Moses and Elijah appear. It's a vision. Peter and the disciples, Peter, James, and John, they see Moses and Elijah. They want to build 3 tents for them. It's a sign, first of all, that there is a life after death, a very real spiritual life that continues on. And people have those visions. It's a gift. St. Paul tells us there's all kinds of gifts. We don't have all the gifts, we have 1 or 2 of them. And I've met people who I believe have that gift of visions. The stories we're going to talk about tonight at Fatima and Lourdes, the young children who had visions. We hear about Medjugorje. We hear about different people who have had visions over the years. It's a gift from God. Not everybody has it. As Sister Joyce just mentioned, I've been married for 50 years. Actually, I warned Sister Joyce that last year my wife and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary on November 18th, which was a blizzard. So I warned her, this might not happen this week, but God is cooperating tonight. My wife's grandmother, when she was first married, one of her children, her daughter, died of meningitis. She was in severe grief. And then one day, years later, she said she was sleeping, and as she looked across the bed, she saw Jesus there on the side of the bed. And then he went around the bed. It wasn't like he was walking, it was like he was floating. And when he got to the side where she was, her daughter came out from behind and said, "I'm okay, Mommy. Don't worry, I'm with Jesus." And they disappeared. And it changed her life. It took that hardness in her heart, that loss, to become a comfort, knowing that she was with the Lord. And it took her all the way to her 107th birthday. So that's kind of that spiritual richness and power that comes with visions. I had someone come up to me once after Mass, and I was preaching at the Mass. They came up to me and they said, you know, when you were preaching, I saw Jesus come off that cross and come down to you and put his arm around you. And I was very moved by that. And did that person really have a vision? You know, some people would say, well, man, maybe that person's a little mentally unstable. That's how visions work. Simple people. People who have deep faith that way. Now, for me, my early childhood memories, sometimes they ask you these things on Facebook, you know, what's the first thing you remember? The first thing I remember is my mother always had a little bottle of Lourdes water on the nightstand next to her bed. She always had it there. And she had seen the movie, The Song of Bernadette. And she told me all about it when I was a kid. And that's my earliest memory, her devotion to Our Lady of Lourdes and to Saint Bernadette. Well, in my junior year, 1964, in high school, our French teacher, Father Cyril Trevette, some of you might know Father Cyril Trevette, he would run a pilgrimage up to the Marian shrines up in Canada and northern U.S. And he needed 2 students to carry the luggage and run errands and all that. So my friend and I, we volunteered and we went up there in 1964. And we went, first of all, to a place called Three Rivers, Trois Rivières. And they have candlelight processions. We sing the songs, you pray the rosaries, and they talk about the miracle that Mary did to freeze over the St. Lawrence River so they could get the wood from the other side, and it never freezes over. But they prayed, and it just blocked up, and they brought all the logs across to be able to build this church. Then we went up to Quebec, to St. Anne de Beaupré. I don't know if any of you have ever been to St. Anne de Beaupré. St. Anne de Beaupré, and I remember all the crutches and canes and apparatuses upon the wall and the forearm of St. Anne, the relic in a case there. And then we came back through Maine and we went to the Marian village of La Salette. Again, another Marian apparition from France. Well, that watered the seed that my mother had planted in me about Mary and her visions and her messages. And then, when I started teaching at St. Joe's in 1972, I started running pilgrimages up to Quebec, to St. Anne de Beaupré for the faculty and the students for 30 years. And I would take them there and, you know, they'd see all what I saw. And it's like, it's a very powerful experience being there in that shrine and hearing the stories and seeing all the crutches and canes there and to say, you know, what is this message of Mary for us? And then on October 15th, 2017, was the 100th anniversary of the big miracle at Fatima. And at that point, I was serving as the pastoral administrator in Attica. And I talked to the congregation and said, hey, you want to go? And we had 44 people, pilgrims, who went there. And the real date of the anniversary was October 13th, but that had been sold out for years. It was so crowded. So we went 2 days after that, and I got to see the spot where all of this took place, and to be there with tens, hundreds of thousands of people. And then we went to Lourdes from there, and we spent several days there also. And it was like the cycle was completed, that this was something that my mother had planted in me from my early childhood, and now I was walking on this holy ground. And then, last quick thing, is 4 weeks ago, my wife and I went with one of the parishioners from St. Joe's, and we went to see a movie. It's called The Miracle Club. Anybody see that movie? It came out this summer. If you get the chance, see that movie. Great actresses. It takes place in Ireland, and they're having a pilgrimage to go over, and they're kind of offering up some, as gifts, trips to go. And these elderly Irish ladies go to Lourdes. And it's funny, but it's very, very spiritually moving. I think you'll find it great. But that's not the only part. It's the lady we went with, Louise. I went to lunch with her yesterday. My wife and I went to lunch with her after Mass. And she had just gotten back from Florida Saturday night. And she says, "You'll never believe. Guess what movie we watched on the airplane coming back from Florida? We watched The Miracle Club." And she is fighting cancer. And she really believes, is this just a coincidence? Is this a sign? How does faith really work in all of these instances? So let's explore now a little bit of what happened there and where we're going with that. So hopefully everyone has one of these sheets. There's some sheets over there. There's some in back. I don't know, do we have any others? I don't know, sister, do you have any more? Or they're all in the back? Okay. So we're going to start with talking about Lourdes, and that's in France. And I'm going to do that because it's more chronological that way, okay? So the first thing we have on there is the name of the young girl who had these visions, Bernadette Subaru. She was 14 years old when she had this vision of Mary. She was very simple, uneducated, poor health, and a poor family. And on February 11th, 1858, she went with her sister, Toinette, and her neighbor, Jean Amadi. And they went out, they were sent by their parents to gather some firewood. And so they walked about a mile outside of town. And there's a river that runs through. And on one side, it's kind of a rocky area. And on the other side is the wooded area. And let me just quickly ask, has anybody here been to Lourdes in France? Okay. You saw the river and the grotto and everything, right? So they're over there on the side where the grotto is, and they take off their shoes. They're barefoot now, as they're going to wade across the river to get the firewood. And all of a sudden, the next thing on here is the coup de vent. That's the big French thing. They hear two strong gusts of winds, just whoosh. But they look around, and the trees and the bushes aren't moving a bit. And all I could think of was, this is like Moses in the burning bush. He takes his shoes off because he's on holy ground. And the bush is on fire, but it's not burning. Strange signs, physical signs of a spiritual presence. Again, the physical and the spiritual worlds working together to tell us that God is here in a very, very special way. Well, Bernadette and the children, and they're trembling with this sound, and all of a sudden they see in the side of this kind of cave niche this young lady appear. She tells them not to worry, to be calm. She tells them to pray the rosary with her, a prayer they knew, and so they pray the rosary with her. Then they go home, and Bernadette says, listen, we can't tell anybody. They're going to think we're crazy, that we saw something like this. Well, her sister, Toinette, blah, 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 she blabs, we saw Mary, and everything, and there's corporal punishment. Stop lying, you're crazy. You would think somebody would say something like that, it's like, oh my God, this is marvelous. Absolutely the opposite. The priest says, it's the work of the devil. And so it's a very threatening thing. And the lady says to them, come back here for 15 days. And they go there on February 18th. It's Mary's promise. And she promises them that they will be happy, not in this world, but in the next world, the new life that awaits them. Like I said, they're holy. And they go back on February 25th to the grotto. And that's when Mary asks her, she says to, and actually many people thought that Bernadette was just plainly crazy. Now, she was only 4.5 feet tall. She was not tall. She was bent over, very poor health, and they thought she was mentally deranged. And then on February 25th, she said, Mary asked me to dig, and she starts digging into the ground. And they said, she's crazy. And all of a sudden, as she's digging, this water and mud comes up. She starts drinking from that. And people said, she's just crazy. Well, when they come back the next day, the water coming out of there is pure and clear, unmuddied now. And that becomes the very important Lourdes water that I mentioned earlier. So what we have next is Professor Verges. And with this holy water, people are going there, and people who are sick are saying, I can walk again. I can see, I can hear. And he verifies that there were indeed 7 miraculous cures. No scientific explanation for it whatsoever. Then the next thing on there is that Emperor Napoleon III, what happened was, for both of these, for both Lourdes and Fatima, there was a lot of political unrest going on both in France, Portugal, Spain. It was a time when communism was coming in, and there was a lot of anti-church, anti-clerical feeling, and we'll see a lot more of that as I go along here. But they had closed it down. The government closed it down. They put barricades around it, and they blocked off that no one could go to that grotto where Bernadette had seen the Blessed Mother, and they were forbidden. So Emperor Napoleon said, no, that's not right. And he opened it up again so people could go back to that little niche where you would go today to see and to drink the water or bathe in it, whatever. And the local bishop in 1860, he declared that these visions were authentic. Okay, and that's important because whenever we have like visions and they say, well, what did Mary say? It has to be consistent with what Jesus teaches. And that's a key element there, because sometimes there are inauthentic visions that are contrary to what Jesus said or what the Bible says, and the church would say, we don't think we can say these are authentic visions. So that's a challenging point for that, okay? Now the next one, Joseph Hughes Fabiche, on April 4th, 1864. Because of the popularity of the spot there, they asked that he make a statue based on what Bernadette told them. So Bernadette described the Blessed Mother and what she looked like, and he built this statue. Well, that day when they unveiled it, there were 20,000 people there. And it's still there. So if you go to Lourdes, you would see that same statue there. And the only thing I can tell you is that Bernadette hated it. She says, that's not what I told you. You made her look much older, like a traditional statue. She said, she was young. She was only a teenager when I saw her. And she was shorter. You made her so tall as an adult. She was about 5 feet tall, 4.5 feet. And the one thing that's different, and you'll always kind of know which is the statue of the Lady of Lourdes, is that Mary doesn't have the traditional blue robe draped around her. Rather, she has like a blue sash with 2 streams coming from it, because that's the way she saw her. And the reason for that is because that was the uniform for the school children in Lourdes of what they call the Children of Mary. And Bernadette so wanted to belong to that group, but her family was so poor she couldn't pay the monthly dues. So when she saw the Blessed Mother, she saw her as the children were wearing this. And later, after she had seen these visions and they were verified, she was given honorary membership finally in the Children of Mary. One of the things that she said, and I think this is an important thing, is she said, my job is to inform, not to convince. I'm just going to tell you what I saw, what she told me. I'm just telling you. Now, if you believe it, you believe it. If you don't, I'm not going to argue with you, she said. That spring today is still there. And if you go to see that movie, The Miracle Club, you will see that they have baths there. So they're built right into the side of that hill there. Did you go to the baths? People who have been there? Okay. You went to the baths? Okay. So they show that in there. I went into the baths, and it's a little tub, and there's probably about 7 or 8 for the men, 7 or 8 for the women. And you go in there, and they have people who help you in there, and you go into the water. They pray with you. You pray with them, and it's cold. Trust me, that it's very cold. But that is the essence of that thing. And that spring that she dug out of there provides 27,000 gallons of water daily. So that's still there, and they have taps there where people can take the Lourdes water, bring it home to friends and relatives, but it's there for the taking. And that's one of the big signs, I think, of Lourdes, and there's no charge or anything for that. They get 3 million visitors every year. And when we were there, at nighttime they sing and they say the rosary in different languages and all that, and they march around, and it's amazing this, because we were there at an optimal time with Fatima and Lourdes in October, and it was probably in the hundreds of thousands at that point. And that's the beautiful part I just want to share with you, is what I like to do was I went across the bridge to the side where the forest was, and I like to watch across the grotto and see the statue and the altar, and to see all the people going there. And again, tens of thousands of people every day. And many of them are pushing wheelchairs, people on crutches and everything. And you can't help but see the love of people taking care of loved ones who are hoping and praying for some kind of miracle, some kind of help. And they're there very patiently. They're there very joyously. And they're there because their faith says, God is here in a very special way. This is holy ground. And it's very moving to see that type of power. And as they say in the movie, they say, well, one of these people, did anybody have a miracle? And the priest says, people don't just come here for the miracles. They come here for the strength to carry on when there is no miracle. And so people sometimes find that relationships, outlooks on life, their personality, their faith changes. And that's the real miracle of Fatima and Lourdes, the kind of spiritual and personal transformation that takes place. She became a nun at the age of 22. She died on April 16th, so that's the next one down there. April 16th, 1879. She died at the age of 35, and her favorite book was The Imitation of Christ. She just wanted to live the way Christ lived. Franz Werfel, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. In 1943, he said this: "For those who believe, no explanation is necessary. For those who do not believe, no explanation is possible." Now, the story with Franz Werfel is this. He's Jewish. And in the late 1930s, when the Nazis were taking over Austria, he and his family moved from Austria to France for security, because they were taking all the Jewish people to the concentration camps. Well, about a year later, they invaded France, and life was very much endangered for the Jewish people in France. So, believe it or not, this is exactly what they show in The Sound of Music. Franz Werfel and his family went to live in Lourdes, and the nuns took care of him, protected him, made sure that no one would find out that they were staying there. And this Jewish man prays to Mary, prays to Bernadette, and says, if my family and I get to America safely, I will write a book about what happened here at Lourdes. He did get here safely, and in 1941, he wrote the book called The Song of Bernadette. And it's interesting that when he wrote the book, it has 5 sections and 10 chapters in each section. It's a rosary. 5 sections with 10 chapters in each one. He remained Jewish, but his faith was so strong. And then 2 years later, 1943, they made it into a movie, and that's the movie my mother saw, The Song of Bernadette. And that movie, by the way, won 4 Academy Awards. It was very, very well done. And I just read that they've been working on a musical based on the book, The Song of Bernadette, that should be open either later this year or next year. So something to look forward to. It's still a popular, inspirational story. Okay? That's it for Lourdes. So let me just ask, are there any questions? Because there's a lot more to say, but does anybody have any questions or maybe something to add to this? Okay, well, let's move on then to Fatima in Portugal. We have the name of the 3 shepherd children, Lucia dos Santos and her cousins, Francisco and Jacinta Marto. And they were aged, Lucia was 7, Francisco was 10, and Jacinta was 9. And very similar. Simple children, uneducated. They didn't read newspapers. They had no knowledge of what was going on outside of their village in Portugal or Europe or the world. In 1916, in Valinhos is like a mile or so outside of town. It was a countryside, like a farm away. And the children were out there taking care of the sheep. And they had 3 visions of the angel of peace. Now, 1916, World War I is going on. 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution. So that's a background of what's going on in the world politically. I put a special section at the bottom. I'll get to that later. Then it was on May 13th, 1917. In the Covarderia. Now, the Covarderia is actually like a section of town in Fatima. It's like Kaisertown, if any of you know, it's a certain area, and you know where it is and what kind of people live there. So the Covarderia, they're out tending their sheep, and in the middle of the day, there's some lightning and all that, and this woman, Mary, appears to the shepherd children and asks them to come back on the 13th of every month. And they do. So when they get home, once again, corporal punishment. The priest is telling them this is satanic. There is no support. And actually, as we'll see here, there's every inclination of the parents to get the kids to stop going there. But they are very persistent because they believe that this woman in white, who's on the top of the tree, has got a message for them. As a matter of fact, as the news of these apparitions started to spread throughout the area, crowds started to come. And the children said that the Virgin told them that God had sent Mary with a message for every man, woman, and child living in the 20th century. Okay? So it's a worldwide message. Many people discounted the children's stories. They thought they were making it up, all kinds of fabrications, etc. So the next thing we have there is Father Ferreira, who was the parish priest. And he was her confidant. He was her confessor. And he was trying to discern, is this authentic or is this, child imagination or what? But he was her strongest supporter. The next one we have there is Arthur Santos. Now, he was the mayor of the town, and he was trying to silence these kids because they were creating havoc. And one of the things that in political crises and tensions like that is you don't want any, what we would call today, influencers. So they would go after the clergy, the educators, the people who could influence the way people would think. And he arrested them. August 13th. They were arrested. And Lucia's mom said, please, keep her in jail until she gives up this crazy story. Well, they pretended they were boiling the kids and everything. You hear the screams from the back room. But the kids stayed strong. They were very convinced this was an authentic thing. So they were let go because the crowd gathered outside. There were 20,000 people there. And they demanded that the children be released. So the children were released. And they did go back to the Covedaria. And they did see Mary on the 13th of August. Well, the papers, all these newspapers, most of the newspapers were communist at this point, and they were mocking it out. They were degrading it, all these people, fools following children who imagine seeing some lady in the village. They said, we need a sign, show us something. So there it was. On August 13th, Mary said, I will show a sign in October for all to see. Okay, so we go down to the next one. October 13th, 1917, the miracle of the sun. Well, word had gotten out. Newspapers were there. There's a wonderful video. There's a lot of videos. The one I used at school that I love the most, it's called Fatima, and it's narrated by Ricardo Montalban. He's got the accent and everything. You remember him from Fantasy Island, the plane. So he narrates this, and he's a very, very passionate believer in Fatima, so it's really wonderful. But they interview many of the people who were there, many of the relatives, etc., and they have some tremendous archival video of 1917. So I would highly recommend it. As a matter of fact, if you want, you can go to the internet, and on Google, they have the movie broken down into like 3 sections, and you can watch it. And I think you'll find it very, very uplifting and moving to see what's going on there with the, real action things. But in October, the region was going through a major war of World War I. It had been raining for 3 days straight. The videos they show, it's like mud beyond mud, and everything is totally saturated. I have a picture here, if anybody wants to see it afterwards, of a photograph of the people there. There were between 70 and 100,000 people, and you can see the mud, you can see all the umbrellas, etc., and it comes out very clearly in the video. Well, many people who were there were unbelievers, and the only reason they were there was to mock this out and to show what a fraud this was. So, if you would allow me to, what I would like to do is to read, if I can find the page that I just lost. Oh, here it is. This is a newspaper excerpt that was reported the next day in Portugal, and this is from a communist newspaper. It says, here it was, pouring, noon. Suddenly, the clouds separated, and the sun appeared between them in the clear blue like a disk of white fire. The people could look at the sun without blinking. And while they gazed upward, the huge ball began to dance. The huge fireball whirled rapidly with dizzy and sickening speed, flinging out all sorts of brilliant colors that reflected on the faces of all the people in the crowd. The fiery ball continued to gyrate in this manner for 3 times. Then it seemed to tremble and shudder and plunge in a mighty zigzag course toward the earth. The crowd was terrified, fearing this was the end of the world. However, the sun reversed course and, retracing its zigzagging course, returned to its normal place in the heavens. All of this transpired in approximately 10 minutes. After realizing they were not doomed, the crowd began ecstatically laughing, crying, shouting, and weeping. Many discovered that their previously drenched clothing to be perfectly dry, as was the ground around them. So either you believe it or you don't believe it. Was it a coincidence that Mary said, on this day at noon, this solar phenomenon takes place? That's the question, I think, sometimes with faith. Does God give us signs, but we call them coincidences? I like to call it sacred synchronicity. When I have a need and God is answering it through a certain sign, they synchronize my need with God's caring for me. I'll tell you a quick story. We were going to visit my in-laws who live in central New York, and we had 3 children. They were young at the time, and we started going down, heading towards Ithaca, is where they were living, in the Finger Lakes. We're going down the 33, actually taking the same route I was taking here tonight. Never thought about that. And all of a sudden, I'm hearing this clank, 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 clank in the car. And okay, there's a very disturbing noise, so I pull over, and it was raining. It was pouring that night, just like Fatima. So I get out, as if I know, looking at the engine or something, what to do with it. Unless I need a Bugs Bunny thing, it's over here. This is the problem, narrow. But I looked and nothing, so I said, we better go home. This sounds too dangerous, the kids in the back seat, etc. So we went home, called up the in-laws, said, we had a problem with the car, we're not coming, okay. So the next day I get up and look under the car, stopped raining, and there in one of the wheels, there was a branch, this time of the year, a branch that had fallen off a tree and got wedged there, so as the wheel was turning, it was making this noise, and it was like, okay, simple enough solution. But when I went to get it out, I noticed that the tire had a big bulge on the inside of the wall, and it would have probably blown traveling on the thruway. I would have lost control, the car may have flipped over. Again, was that a coincidence? Or was that branch put there by God to get us to get a new tire and to go safely with the kids? That's where it comes up to us with our faith to interpret the meaning of all these types of things. And I'm sure many of you have probably had experiences like that really were beyond explanation. Okay, well, let's go back to our sheets. Enough of me blabbing on here, right? That's by the way, that's why we went on October 15th, because on October 13th, which was the 100th anniversary of the miracle of the sun, there were well over 1 million people there at Fatima praying and all that. I was very honored to be able to be at the altar and to say Mass with the other people from all over the world. And that's the beautiful part, is people from all over the world, North America, South America, Africa, Asia, it doesn't matter, India. There are people there who have faith, and it's to me, that is inspirational in itself, seeing people coming from all over the world filled with hope. Just like we're filled with hope for the Bills tonight. Oh, that's another story. That's a miracle. So May 13th, 1920 and 1930, what had happened is the government had shut down these places, but the people went out there defying the government, carrying images and posters of the Blessed Mother, and they went back to that spot where Mary had appeared to the shepherd children, and they prayed and they honored her. So they were standing in the face of the government at that time. February 13th, 2005, Sister Lucia dies. She's 97 years old. And we'll get back to her in a second. And on May 13th, 2017, Pope Francis canonized the two cousins, Francesco and Jacinta. Okay? Now, I want to look a little bit at the political aspects because that's kind of an important part of this also. So first of all, we have the Portuguese Revolution, 1910. And one of their main agendas was to be anti-clerical. They arrested the priests, the nuns, sorry sister, they left the deacons alone. We don't do anything. But it was anti-clerical. They wanted to get them away from the people, any kind of influence, because of course, one of the teachings is, religion is the opium of the masses. They were trying to move into an atheistic state. So in that revolution in 1910, that set the scene for why maybe the Blessed Mother appeared in Portugal, because the people needed to have a message of hope to stick with their faith. Again, in the 1920s and 1930s, the Catholics there were trying to combat the godless communist government. And then the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, that was 6 months after the visions took place. And this is the part that, when it happened back there, Lucia said something that made no sense to the priests, the church leaders, or anybody. And it's like, okay, this just proves that she doesn't know what she's talking about. And she said, the Blessed Mother said we need to pray for the conversion of Russia. Everybody said, wait. Russia is the most Catholic nation on the face of the earth. The Russian Orthodox Church is really like the only religion there. It's very strong. Why would you want to pray for the conversion of Russia? Interesting. We get back to that in a second now. So the next thing is the Blue Army of Our Lady of Fatima. This is a group that took up the messages of Mary that Lucia had transcribed and wrote them down, and they encouraged daily prayer, the saying of the rosary, etc. And they came up with a prayer that some of you may be familiar with, because it's a prayer that is added into the rosary. It's, "O my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell, lead all souls into heaven, especially those most in need of your mercy." That appeal for salvation of people who have strayed away, for the people who most need to be welcomed back into the church, is a very, very powerful thing. So you may remember, some of you, I remember when I was an altar server, we would do our prayers and end our Mass, and Savior of the world, save Russia. There was a dedication there to that. And all I have to say is, let's look at the world today, what's going on, the godlessness, the war, the killing, etc. Okay? So the next thing is one of the most important things we have here, the 3 secrets of Fatima. And there's been a lot of theorizing about this and a lot of mystery, etc. And sometimes people get confused about, well, what really is Mary saying here? So the first one was this: the children had a vision of hell. And when they saw this horrible thing, this torture after death, the Blessed Mother said, you will not experience this, but there will be people who do not follow the ways of God who will experience this horrific end. So they were very, very concerned about that, and they told people about this horrible vision of hell. But once again, it talks about a spiritual life that continues after our physical life. I think some people today don't see that necessarily. That's an important spiritual gift for us. The next thing we have here is January 25th, 1938. The second secret of Fatima is that Mary said that if they pray the rosary, if they have a devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, World War I would end. But if people don't return to God, if they continue to go in their godless ways, there will be a worse war that would take place. And there will be a sign for this. The other war would be announced by a mysterious great light in the night. And there on January 25th, 1938, front page of the New York Times, what we're experiencing here right now, the largest experience of the aurora borealis since the 1500s. The sky was illuminated. It was just like an unbelievable display of light at night. Less than a month later, Hitler invades Austria. And weeks after that, Czechoslovakia. It was the beginning of World War II. And when Sister Lucia was in the monastery, she became a nun, she saw that light and she said, that's the sign that Mary told us about. So that was the second one. On the next one, Pope Pius XII, July 7th, 1952, and October 13th, 1958. On July 7th, he was the first pope, Pope Pius XII, who consecrated Russia to the Virgin Mary. The other popes had been resistant. They were worried about getting into politics and making statements, etc. But Pius XII, that's where we got the Savior of the world, save Russia. And then, strangely, is this a reward or a sign? On October 13th, miracle of the sun, October 13th, he dies and is buried in the Vatican. Is this the Blessed Mother calling him home on that special day? Again, or is it just a coincidence? Then we have Pope John Paul II, May 13th, 1981. That is the third secret. Many of you probably remember it was on that day that he was riding in his Pope mobile through the Vatican Square. And that's when he was shot. And the secret that was handed down was that a bishop dressed in white, passing through a huge city, is shot and laying on the ground as if dead. And again, that took place on May 13th, the day of the first vision of Mary at Fatima. Now, again, some people would say it's a coincidence, you know. Well, interestingly, 1 year later, May 13th, 1982, Pope John Paul II goes with well over 1 million people to Fatima. Sister Lucia comes out of the cloister to greet him. And they recognize that that was the third of the secrets. However, and so Pope John Paul II always said I should have died, but it was the Blessed Mother that made that bullet miss the vital organ, and he survived from that. So again, you know, this is like taking the things. And by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but when he went to Fatima the year after he was shot, somebody tried to kill him with a bayonet. Luckily, the person was pushed aside by security guards, but even there, his life was threatened. So, you know, that's part of that whole mystique that's going on there. Pope Benedict the 16th went to Portugal, to Fatima, from May 11th to May 14th in 2010. And that was the 10th anniversary of the beatification of Francisco and Jacinta. And he said something that startled me. I'm going to just quote what he said. He said the third secret was not only John Paul II being shot, but also referring to a greater suffering for the church as a result of the recent reports of sexual abuse involving the clergy. And he was very, very disturbed by how that was attacking the church. So, he's adding an interpretation to, I think, was that part of that third secret or not? Okay. The next one there, Pope Francis, March 25th, 2022, just last year. It was on that date that Pope Francis consecrated Russia and Ukraine to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So that all continues through the modern world, what's going on in the world right now, and the need for our prayers. And that's the big thing of the Blessed Mother, is the call for prayer, the call for reparation, the call for penance. We can't go over there and fight. We shouldn't go over there and fight, but we need to pray that spiritual power we have. And the key point of all these visions and the key teaching of Jesus in the Gospels is that we do God's will. When I say the most important thing, Jesus is always, he says, who are my mother and brothers? Who are my sister? Whoever does the will of God. And people say, well, what is the will of God? Jesus makes very clear there are four basic components to the will of God on earth as it is in heaven. The first one we just heard 2 weeks ago in the Gospel. Of the 613 Jewish laws, which one is the greatest, Jesus? He says the greatest is this: love God with your whole heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then he adds something very important. All the prophets and writings are based on this love. Jesus is always talking about love, the importance of love. So when we act out of love, and no greater love has someone than to lay down their life to give up watching a Bills game to come here tonight, perhaps. This is that sacrifice. That's what love is, that spiritual love. The second thing is peace. Whenever Jesus appears to his disciples after Easter, after the resurrection, he always greets them, peace be with you. And then he breathes on them. Receive the Spirit. So once again, he's sending something invisible, that resurrected Spirit. And he's always talking about peace. And, we have that big sign of peace before we receive communion, and we share it with one another. Then, Jesus is very often talking about joy. May my joy be in you and your joy be complete. And he says that a lot, and we don't pick it up. And sometimes I wonder, why are we so glum and so somber when we come to Mass? This is a joyful experience. We are in the presence of God. This is where we're here and God's presence with us. That joy is an important thing. And we are called to bring joy to one another. And the fourth one, the last one, is hope. Jesus is always saying, if you have faith in me, have faith in God also. For God, all things are possible. For God, all things are possible. That's that sense of hope. That's the important element of our faith. And we're just a couple of weeks away from Advent. And we light 4 candles. Each candle has a theme: love, peace, joy, and hope. Those are the 4 messages, because that is what Jesus is telling us is the will of God. We should ask ourselves at the end of every day an examination of conscience. How did I bring love, joy, peace, and hope to other people? Or did I take it away? That's the measuring tool that Jesus gives us. And it's the same thing for all the visions. That's how to live life. In 2 weeks, we have the Feast of Christ the King. And on that day, we're going to hear the gospel, the last gospel of the year from Matthew. And it's going to be Matthew 25. And many scholars would say that is the most important passage in all four Gospels because it's repeated 4 times. It's like highlighting it 4 times in different colors. And that's this. They asked Jesus, who's going to go to heaven? And he says, well, God will call them like a shepherd calls the sheep and the goats. Sheep on one side, goats on the other. And he'll say to the sheep, when I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. And he goes through all those wonderful works of mercy. Then they say, so they repeat it a second time, but Lord, when did we see you hungry and give you to eat? When did we see you thirsty? When were you lonely and we visited you? When were you in prison? And he says, when you did it to the least of the people, you did it to me. And then he'll say to the goats, get away from me, because when I was hungry, you did not give me to eat. You didn't give me to drink. And again, they say, but when did we not see you? And again, when you didn't do it to the least of the people, you didn't do it for me. That's the message of Fatima and Lourdes. It's the message of every vision of Mary. That motherly love and concern, that mother's embrace of her children, especially the most marginalized and those who are the least. So that's our call this Advent season, to carry the message of Mary with us through those 4 candles, the candles of love, peace, joy, and hope. God bless you, and thank you for listening. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Thank you. Here's a picture from when we went with a collect group, and that's the picture of Fatima when we went in 2017. You can see all the crowd there. Thank you.
Thank you, Deacon. Thank you, Deacon Ted. You have given us much information and inspiration regarding the Blessed Mother and her appearances. We're grateful to learn more about her and to deepen our appreciation of and our relationship with our Mother Mary. Thank you again. Just a reminder that our next enrichment speaker presentation will be a double header. On Monday, December 11th and on Tuesday, December 12th, Deacon Greg Feary will lead a 2-evening Advent retreat entitled The Voices of Advent. You won't want to miss this event. Deacon Greg's presentations will be from 7 until 8:30 p.m. And I want to thank our Taste and See Committee for providing our snacks for us this evening. Please stop by the table in the back of the church and enjoy them. Thank you to our live stream team, and thank you to our Holy Name Society for funding our presentation tonight. If you're able to make a donation to our speaker series, there's a basket in the back of the church and also by the side door. God bless you. Have a great evening. Thank you for coming out, and go Bills.
What time is it? I don't even know.
Oh, it's probably only a minute or two after. You're right on.